She boarded the flight like anyone else, calm, composed, unnoticed, no entourage, no name tag, just a quiet black woman in seat 1A. But when a flight attendant slapped her for not knowing her place, she didn't scream. She didn't fight. She whispered, "You just made the worst mistake of your life." What the crew didn't know, she wasn't just a passenger. She was the newly appointed chairwoman of the $4.7 billion airline they worked for. Why did she fly anonymously? Why was she testing the very staff meant to serve her? And how did one slap caught on a flight manifest and a silent AI system change everything about air travel? This isn't a story about revenge. It's about quiet power, legacy, and the difference between being seated first and owning the plane. So if you've ever felt underestimated or wondered what justice looks like when it doesn't shout, hit like, share, and subscribe, because what happens next will stay with you long after the seatbelt sign goes off. Let's begin. The sound didn't belong up here, not among the quiet hum of pressurized air, the clink of crystal water glasses, or the lull of first-class politeness. It was sharp, sudden, open-palmed, and it hit Dr. Evelyn Mercer square across the left cheek. A gasp slipped from the woman across the aisle. A man in seat 1B dropped his phone. Somewhere near 3A, someone whispered, "What the hell was that?" But Evelyn didn't move. Her hand stayed folded in her lap, fingers gently interlaced. Her back didn't flinch. Her eyes, though wide, were dry. She simply sat there in her seat, 1A eyes lifting slowly to meet the woman who'd struck her. Trina Caldwell, lead flight attendant, was breathing hard. One hand hovered in midair, the other clenched the handle of the silver drinks tray. Her voice trembled with barely contained fury. "You need to move," she hissed, teeth clenched. "Back row, or I'll have the captain escort you off once we land." Evelyn's eyes never left hers. Her voice, when it came, was soft. Too soft for the venom just thrown at her, but that only made it hit harder. "I wouldn't do that," she said. Then she reached down, as if to retrieve something from her purse. No panic, no rage, just a controlled breath. One press of her thumb. Her phone lit up. One word, initiate. She set it back in her lap. Screen down. No one knew what she'd just done. Not Trina. Not the man still staring from 1B. Not the couple behind her who'd earlier whispered, "Wonder if she snuck into first class somehow." No one on that plane knew who she was. No one knew she wasn't Ruth Daniels. As her boarding pass read, no one knew she had sat silently through 38 minutes of hostility, and no one, not even the captain, knew that the woman they just watched get slapped owned 63% of the very airline they were flying on. But they were about to find out. 8 hours earlier. JFK International. The November air was brittle, the kind that cracked against your cheeks when the sun looked warmer than it was. Evelyn stepped out of the black car alone. No assistant, no entourage, no oversized luggage. She wore a tailored wool coat, navy slacks, and low, sensible heels. Her hair, soft silver curls, was pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. If anyone noticed her at all, they'd have guessed retired school principal. Maybe a professor, someone smart, but quiet, harmless. And that's exactly what she wanted. "Miss Daniels," the driver said, using the name on the boarding pass. "Are you sure you don't want me to carry that for you?" She smiled faintly, lifting her slim brown travel case. "I've carried heavier." He didn't ask what that meant. Inside the terminal, Evelyn walked through security without issue. No upgrades, no attention, just a first-class ticket, printed under a false name, on Horizon Air Flight 212, nonstop from New York to Geneva. It was a route she had flown before. But this time, it wasn't for business. It was the business. At 8:37 that morning, through a discreet web of proxy transactions, Evelyn Mercer became the majority shareholder of Horizon Air, an elite airline known for its sky-high service, price tags, and exclusivity. All clean, all legal, all done through Mercer Equity Trust, her silent holding firm. The press wouldn't find out for another week, but Evelyn wasn't waiting. She needed to see the airline as it was before the press release, before the internal memos, before anyone knew who was really in charge. She needed to know how they treated people when they didn't know they were being watched. So she watched. Boarding was orderly. The man ahead of her, white, early 50s, was greeted with 2 smiles and a cheerful, "We're so honored to have you." Sir Evelyn offered her ticket. Trina Caldwell took it without looking up. Her tone was clipped. "Economies through the other gate. I'm in 1A." Evelyn replied evenly. Trina finally glanced up. Her eyes scanned Evelyn's coat, her shoes, her carry-on, none of it designer. Her smile didn't return. She stepped aside slowly, stiffly. "Of course," she muttered. Evelyn walked down the jet bridge alone, stepped onto the aircraft. The air inside was warm, champagne-colored leather, a hint of bergamot in the recycled air. She took her seat. No one greeted her, no welcome drink, no warm towel. Across the aisle, 2 women in seats 2A and 2B were already sipping wine. One of them laughed and said, "I just love how they treat us up here. It's like they know who matters." Evelyn leaned back, adjusting slightly. Her hip had been aching all morning, a leftover gift from her cancer recovery. She didn't block the aisle, just stretched, gently, subtly. And then a crash. The wine tray slammed into her leg. Red liquid splattered down her slacks. Trina's voice rang out like a siren. "You need to keep your legs to yourself, ma'am." Evelyn looked down. Her leg hadn't moved in 10 minutes. "You walked into me," she said quietly. Trina blinked. "You're disrupting service." She barked, "This is first class. If you want to act out, there's a seat in row 29. The passengers around her shifted, uncomfortable. No one spoke. Then Trina leaned in. "Respect is earned, sweetheart." And before anyone could blink, the slap, it wasn't a warning tap. It was loud, deliberate, open-palmed. A breathless pause fell over the cabin. That's when Evelyn looked up and said, "You just made the worst mistake of your career." And then, almost tenderly, she reached for her phone. 6 hours before the slap, the terminal at JFK buzzed with quiet luxury. Somewhere between the polished floors and designer luggage was a woman who had once given up trying to be noticed. Not out of shame, but out of choice. Dr. Evelyn Mercer stood by gate 36B, coffee in hand, reading the departures board as if it might reveal more than time and weather. She had always liked airports. Something about the liminality, the in-between, offered a strange kind of peace. No one was arriving. No one was home. Everyone was becoming. She looked down at her phone. One message. From her attorney, "The purchase is finalized. You own controlling interest." A pause. "Do you want us to notify the airline?" Evelyn didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook creased at the spine, filled with clean block lettering. At the top of today's page, Field Assessment Flight 212. Objective observational integrity. This wasn't about ownership. It was about culture. Horizon Air had built its brand around experience, private lounge exclusivity, legacy champagne, foreign-trained attendants. It marketed itself as a curated journey for the discerning traveler, which, Evelyn knew from years of boardroom doublespeak, was code for expensive, selective, and quietly exclusionary. She'd read the internal audits, not the ones prepared for PR, the real ones. They showed a trend. Bias complaints were statistically low, but that didn't mean much when nearly every complaint from staff of color or passengers over age 60 was marked unsubstantiated within 72 hours. The behavior wasn't always loud. That's what made it harder to address. It came in patterns: who was smiled at, who got extra attention, who got called sir or ma'am with actual respect, and who didn't. Evelyn wasn't here today as a billionaire investor. She wasn't even here as herself. Her boarding pass read Ruth Daniels, the name of her grandmother, a woman who had once ridden in the back of a bus across Georgia with her Sunday shoes in a bag to keep them clean. That legacy ran deep. Evelyn ran a fingertip over the boarding pass and exhaled. Her body was still recovering. Post-immunotherapy fatigue was real, but her mind, sharp as glass. She took a sip of coffee. Cold, good, she thought. Keeps me awake. The lounge attendant smiled at the couple in front of her, white, well-dressed, chatting about their ski trip to Gstaad. Enjoy your flight, Mr. and Mrs. Lawson. Then Evelyn stepped up. The attendant barely looked up. Boarding begins at gate 36B in 10 minutes, she said flatly. No eye contact, no warmth. Evelyn nodded politely, said thank you, and moved on. She didn't need affirmation. She just needed confirmation. 22 a.m., gate 36B. Priority. Boarding called. Evelyn approached the scanner with calm ease. She handed over the boarding pass. The gate agent, a young woman with winged eyeliner and perfect posture, paused. Are you sure this is for first class? She asked. Evelyn didn't blink. Yes. Oh, the agent said, scanning it anyway. Okay. Have a nice flight. Miss Daniels. Evelyn nodded again. The slights weren't even harsh. That's what made them effective. They were coated in professionalism. She walked the jet bridge alone. The walkways smelled like industrial carpet and cabin air, familiar and sterile. She passed through the final door and entered the plane, head high, and there she was. Trina Caldwell, tall, blonde, mid-40s, lead flight attendant, wearing a polished smile that crumbled the moment she saw Evelyn, the way her lips pressed tighter, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the tilt of her head, the kind that says, this must be a mistake. Good morning, Evelyn said softly. Trina didn't respond at first. Then, as if on cue, she replied, Economy is down the other aisle. I'm in 1A. Trina blinked, looked at the boarding pass, looked again. Then, without apology, she moved aside. Of course, no welcome, no offer to help with her bag, no offer of a drink. Evelyn took her seat. She didn't complain. She documented. Her carry-on slid beneath the seat like it was made for the space. Her coat folded into a neat rectangle. Her phone sat face down on the tray table, the green LED blinking softly. Recording active. She looked out the window. The ground crew moved like silent ants. An airport assistant gave the pilot a thumbs up. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment and thought of her lake house in Vermont, the cedar one with no internet, where she had once spent 3 months after finishing chemo, learning how to breathe again. She remembered walking outside one morning barefoot, frost on the grass, and thinking, I'm still here. So now, what that moment was, why she was here. The world had given her power when she had long since stopped asking for it. Now, it was a question of what she would do with it. Across the aisle, 2 passengers chatted about a startup they were funding. One of them said, I hear this airline doesn't put up with nonsense. Keeps the wrong people out. Evelyn turned toward the window. Wrong people. She knew what that meant. She had heard that her entire life. Too black, too quiet, too smart, too old, too dressed down, too unexpected. She didn't need to fit their expectations. She needed to break them. The captain's voice came over the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Horizon Flight 212 with nonstop service to Geneva. Estimated flight time is 7 hours and 32 minutes. A light chime followed. Evelyn folded her hands again. A flicker of fatigue passed over her face, but she pushed it down. Today was not for comfort. Today was for clarity. She looked down at her tablet, opened her dashboard. The interface showed her a heat map of the airline's complaint history by crew member. A profile hovered next to Trina Caldwell's name, 7 prior complaints. None escalated. She closed it. She wanted the truth in person, and that truth was coming soon. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, Evelyn's legs had started to ache. She shifted slightly, her right foot edging gently into the aisle, not blocking it, just enough to stretch the stiffness that came from surgeries no one could see. She wasn't asking for attention, but she got it anyway. A glance from Trina, a narrowing of eyes, a plan already forming. 35 minutes into the flight, the cabin had settled into its familiar hum, the muffled clinks of silverware, the soft rustle of blankets, the hush of polite conversation whispered over chamomile and Chardonnay, and, in seat 1A, Dr. Evelyn Mercer sat unmoving, not tense, not confrontational, just aware of every glance not made in her direction, of every smile that skipped past her, of every time the word ma'am sounded stiff, forced, or withheld altogether. She had seen this pattern before. It was the same one she'd seen in boardrooms where male executives greeted her male assistant first. The same one she'd seen at country clubs where she was asked if she was someone's +1. The same one she'd felt even while handing over 7-figure donations to foundations that never pictured her name on a plaque. It didn't offend her. It informed her. Across the aisle, Trina Caldwell was radiant. She bent gracefully toward the passenger in 1B Harold Finch, the real estate investor type, offering him a refill of Merlot with a smile so white it could have been rehearsed. "Oh, and Mr. Finch," she said, a playful lilt in her voice. "We brought on the 2015 vintage this week. Our Geneva Flyers get the first taste." Harold chuckled. "Well now, that's service." Trina beamed, then turned to 2A and 2B, 2 women with French manicures and matching Rimowa carry-ons. "Ladies, would you like another splash?" "Oh, please," one said. "We're celebrating a divorce." "Even better." Trina laughed, pouring generously. 2 new chapters, and then, as if Evelyn weren't 5 feet away, Trina straightened her posture and walked directly past 1A. No glance, no question, no acknowledgement. Evelyn folded her hands tighter. She stared at the reflection of herself in the window. In it, she saw her late mother's cheekbones, her father's stillness, and something else, something earned, not inherited, a sense of knowing. Not just knowing what she deserved, but knowing that most people didn't see it until it was too late. 15 minutes passed. Then Trina returned. She was carrying a silver tray with 4 crystal tumblers and a single tall glass of mineral water. Her heels clicked with purpose. Her chin was raised. Evelyn had shifted again. Her right leg extended just slightly into the aisle. Not obstructing, not intentional, just easing the numbness. Trina saw it and didn't swerve. The tray clipped Evelyn's shin. The glass jolted sloshing cold liquid across Evelyn's lap. The chill hit fast, seeping through the navy slacks, soaking the blouse beneath her coat. But it wasn't the cold that drew gasps from nearby seats. It was Trina's response. "Oh, for God's sake." She snapped, loud enough for half of first class to hear. "You really need to watch where you put your legs." "Ma'am." Evelyn looked down. Water pooled around her waistband, dripping to the carpet. She looked up. Her voice was so calm it made Trina's volume seem almost absurd. "You walked into me." Trina narrowed her eyes. "Excuse me. You saw my leg. You chose not to adjust." "I was doing my job," Trina said sharply. "You're the one taking up unnecessary space." Evelyn's response didn't rise. It softened. "I'm recovering from a medical procedure. That's why I adjusted my seat. That's why my leg was slightly out." She paused. "I didn't ask for anything but care." Trina scoffed. "Respect is earned, sweetheart, not assumed." And then, without warning, she slapped her. The sound echoed off the walls like a dropped tray. Not a shove, Not a brush. A full, open-handed public strike. Every conversation in the cabin stopped. Harold's wine glass tipped in his hand. A woman in row 3 gasped audibly. Someone in 2B muttered, "Oh my God." Evelyn didn't cry. She didn't blink. She didn't touch her cheek, which now carried the faint blush of human cruelty. She simply looked at Trina straight in the eye and said, "You just made the worst mistake of your life." Trina's mouth twitched. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was something else, defensiveness still trying to justify itself. "I'm reporting you," she said. Evelyn didn't move, didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She reached for her phone, unlocked it, typed one word. "Confirm." Across the cabin, Leah Santoro, the junior flight attendant, stood frozen in the service alcove. She had seen it all. The spilled water, the slap, the quiet collapse of professionalism. Her fingers shook as she reached into her pocket and texted the only person she trusted at HQ, to M, Cheney, Director of Ops Subject Urgent Flight, 212. "We have a serious issue. I just saw something bad. Passenger assaulted by Trina. We'll update when safe." Seconds later, a reply appeared. "Understood. Do nothing. We see it. Stay silent for now. Exec team mobilizing. Back in 1A. Evelyn folded her hands again. She stared ahead at nothing. Her cheek throbbed, but it was the implication that stung deeper than skin. She'd been told before that she didn't belong. In prep school, in med school, in Wall Street boardrooms, on fundraising stages where she gave millions and still got mistaken for the help. But this was the audacity of hierarchy without accountability. And Evelyn had spent her whole life preparing for this moment, not to react, but to respond with structure, with system, with power. Harold finally leaned over, voice hushed. "Are you okay?" Evelyn turned, almost smiling. "Oh, I'm fine," she said, but I can't say the same for her. The silence in first class was suffocating. Not the silence of peace or rest, but the kind that blooms after something unthinkable happens in a place where it shouldn't. The kind that tastes like embarrassment and metal and something you're not supposed to name out loud. Dr. Evelyn Mercer sat completely still in seat 1A, her cheek slowly turning a soft maroon. The sting from the slap had started to fade, but the meaning behind it that hadn't, it never did, across from her. Trina Caldwell stood stiff, the tray now shaking in her grip. She could feel the weight of a dozen eyes on her passengers, a co-worker, maybe even the captain, if someone had noticed. But she didn't apologize. She didn't look sorry. She looked annoyed, defensive, like somehow she had been wronged. "I warned her," Trina muttered under her breath, her eyes darting to the front galley. "She's been testing me all flight. These people always want to play the victim." Someone in 2A turned sharply at that, but no one said anything. No one ever does at first, because the people who need to speak are too stunned, and the ones who should speak are afraid they'll be next. Evelyn said nothing, but something shifted in the air around her. She lifted her phone again and tapped the screen once. A tiny blue bar appeared at the top. It was syncing, transmitting, recording. Echo was now fully live. From this moment forward, every word spoken in the vicinity of her seat, every measurable tone shift, every facial micro-expression was being documented, tagged, and cross-referenced by the AI her firm had spent 3 years developing in silence, not for punishment, for proof. In the forward galley, Leah Santoro stood perfectly still behind a curtain, one hand covering her mouth. Her entire body hummed with adrenaline. She had just watched a senior crew member slap a passenger. And not just any passenger. A calm, quiet woman who had said nothing cruel, done nothing aggressive. A woman who had sat with so much grace. Leah had assumed she was someone's tenured professor, or maybe a judge. But now she didn't know who she was, just that she wasn't average. And Leah felt nauseous because she had seen this before. Not exactly, but in pieces. She'd seen Trina snap at passengers who asked too many questions. Seen her give friendlier service to men in suits and barely mask her contempt for difficult types, which almost always meant older women, larger bodies, darker skin. But this wasn't just rudeness. It was violence, and it was going to end her career. Leah reached for her phone, heart pounding. She opened her text to Melissa Cheney, the director of operations at Horizon HQ. She started typing, "Trina struck a Pax." It was bad. First class. Passenger isn't reacting, but something's going to happen. Before she could send it, a message appeared on screen from Melissa. "We're watching. Internal feed confirms. Pilot notified. Diverting. Don't intervene unless prompted." Back in 1A. Evelyn adjusted her posture and folded her hands in her lap again. Trina was still standing there, shaking. Not from regret, but from the growing realization that something had shifted and not in her favor. "You think you can just play this off," she hissed low. "You're not going to get away with lying about this. The footage won't show anything." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Oh, it will. Just not the kind of footage you're thinking about." Trina scoffed. "Whatever. People like you always act like you've been wronged. You're probably filming this for some lawsuit or social media stunt." She turned, angry now, seeking backup from other passengers, but they weren't meeting her eyes anymore. They were staring through her. One woman in 3A pulled her blanket up to her chin. Another shifted her body subtly, turning away. The tide was turning. Trina felt it in her throat. In the cockpit, Captain Wells tapped his earpiece as a voice fed him instructions from dispatch. "Captain, per advisory from Ops, we're requesting emergency diversion protocol. Do not announce passenger identity. Begin rerouting to Zurich secondary hub. We're dispatching an executive team to the tarmac." Captain Wells blinked. He'd flown Horizon Air for 18 years. This wasn't routine. He flipped to the cabin intercom. "Ding. Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly, "due to an onboard systems indicator, we will be making an unscheduled landing in Zurich. This is a precautionary measure. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll update you shortly." The cabin reacted with polite confusion, a few raised brows, a few audible huhs, but only one person knew what it really meant. Evelyn Mercer closed her eyes and exhaled softly. Across the aisle, Harold Finch leaned forward, brows furrowed. "I don't mean to intrude," he said gently, "but do you need anything?" "Water A tissue." Evelyn turned to him. Her expression was kind. "Even now, I appreciate it," she said, "but I'm all right." He hesitated. Then, "Do you mind me asking, are you someone important?" She considered the question for a moment, then answered, "I'm someone paying attention." Trina stumbled back to the galley. She shoved the tray into the storage unit, knocking over a container of stir sticks. She ran a hand through her hair. Her breath was coming in short bursts now. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "She's manipulating this. She planned this." Leah stepped in, slowly. "Trina," she said carefully, "maybe we should sit down for a minute. Just cool off." Trina rounded on her. "You're taking her side." Leah didn't answer, but the look in her eyes said enough. 30,000 feet above the Atlantic. A shift had begun, not just a flight path, not just a PR incident, but something deeper, a reckoning. And Evelyn Mercer. She wasn't finished, not even close. The soft glow of the cabin lights dimmed by 20%. A subtle cue to the passengers, prepare for night. Prepare for stillness. But Dr. Evelyn Mercer had no intention of resting. Not yet. She sat in seat 1A, wrapped in a Navy airline blanket that a passing flight attendant, Leah Santoro, the junior, had quietly placed on her lap without a word. Leah hadn't said anything, but she didn't have to. Her eyes had. I saw. "I'm with you." It was enough. The air was thin at 37,000 feet. Thin enough to make a lesser person anxious. But for Evelyn, it created a clarity. As a trauma psychologist turned systemic strategist, she'd always believed that pressure didn't reveal who we are. It distills us. And sitting here, alone with the sting of a slap and the weight of centuries inside her ribcage, she realized this wasn't just about her. It was about every woman who had been called aggressive for asserting boundaries, every black passenger who got asked if they were in the wrong seat, every quiet, competent person told to smile more by someone whose name they outranked. This wasn't just discomfort, it was pattern recognition, and she had built an entire company to address exactly that. 10 months ago, Evelyn had signed the final checks to bring Echo Ethical Cultural Harm Observatory online. It was a quiet product. Nothing flashy, just a neural AI that could detect, track, and timestamp emotional bias in professional interactions based on tone, body language, and proximity triggers. It wasn't made to punish. It was made to create receipts. Real data. Measurable, because too often, harm wore a smile. Too often, exclusion came wrapped in courtesy. And Trina Caldwell. She hadn't even bothered to wrap it. Back in the galley, Trina sat on a jump seat, arms crossed, chest rising and falling. She hadn't spoken in nearly 20 minutes. She knew she had messed up. Maybe not career-ending, but bad, really bad. She kept replaying the moment, the feel of her hand, the slap, the passenger's face. There had been no yelling, no scene, and yet she felt like a net had dropped around her. Why wasn't the woman reacting? Why wasn't she threatening? That's what made it worse, because it meant she had power, the kind of power Trina didn't understand, didn't respect, and now couldn't stop. Meanwhile, the cockpit buzzed with redirected attention. Captain Wells, guided by Zurich Air Ops, began the slow descent protocol, even though they were still an hour from the coast. He didn't ask questions. But in his 30 years of flight experience, he'd seen only 2 other situations where HQ rerouted without medical or mechanical cause. Once when a sitting senator had a breakdown in flight, and once when a CEO got caught screaming racial slurs in row 3. That man had lost his board seat within 24 hours. This felt more serious. In the seat beside Evelyn, Harold Finch cleared his throat. "I have to admit," he said cautiously, "I thought I knew power when I made my first 10 million." She turned slightly. "But watching you just sit there, that's something else." Evelyn didn't respond immediately. Then she smiled softly. "True power doesn't rush. It waits." Harold nodded, humbled. "And what are you waiting for?" She glanced out the window. Lights were beginning to flicker along the horizon. A coastal city waking up below. "Landing," she said simply, but not just the plane. Across the aisle. Passengers had resumed hushed conversation, but no one forgot what happened. In fact, someone in 3B had started typing furiously on her phone. A travel blogger, 200,000 followers. Drafting a post that began with, "I just witnessed a flight attendant slap a black woman in first class." The woman didn't scream. She didn't cry. She opened an app, and now we're being diverted. Something's about to go down. The world was about to know. But Evelyn. She had known all along. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a copy of her Horizon Share purchase agreement, signed 8 years ago. Back then, her family fund had quietly bought 11% of Horizon Air's private equity block under a holding name, Blakeport Trust. 6 months ago, they'd acquired 8% more, enough to secure a controlling interest during board emergencies, a clause she'd written into the bylaws herself. In the name of ethical incident escalation, no one at Horizon even knew she was on the board, but they were about to. The flight intercom pinged again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We'll begin our descent into Zurich in approximately 25 minutes. Local authorities and Horizon executive team members will meet us on the tarmac. Please remain in your seats until further instruction. Gasps, a few whispers, and then stillness. All eyes drifted to the woman in seat 1A and Evelyn Mercer. She just crossed her legs again. Blanket folded neatly over her knees, hands resting calmly, waiting. The wheels hadn't touched the ground yet, but the tension in the cabin had, it settled like a heavy fog over every row, every whisper, every breath that felt just a little too loud. Evelyn Mercer hadn't moved from her seat, but her presence was no longer invisible. People weren't just noticing her now, they were tracking her. Even the silence between her glances felt loaded, and somewhere in the pit of their stomachs, passengers began to suspect, this isn't just a woman in seat 1A. This might be the center of the storm. 20 minutes out from Zurich. The crew had been instructed, no service, no contact, no commentary. That meant Trina Caldwell had to sit in her jump seat, no way to explain, no way to spin, no power in performance, just stillness, and a dread that multiplied every time someone glanced her way and then turned away like she was already gone. She thought she'd have time. Time to explain, to delete the moment, to reframe it in an incident report. But she hadn't counted on this. On Evelyn not yelling, not threatening, not reacting, just waiting. And that's what scared Trina most. In row 3A, the blogger had sent her post live. 3 minutes later, Horizon Flight 212 was trending. 5 more. And Melissa Cheney's phone at HQ buzzed with a second notification from the Ethics Command portal external breach alert. Passenger footage confirmed. Incident viral. Board now alerted. She knew what that meant. The protocol would trigger a shareholder quorum, and the only person who could legally summon a quorum outside fiscal calendar was sitting in seat 1A. Melissa whispered into her earpiece, "She's activated it. Evelyn's done waiting." The lights flickered. Landing sequence begun. And finally, Evelyn stood. She didn't do it dramatically. There was no music, no gasp, just a woman rising, but something about it felt seismic. She reached into the overhead, pulled out a hard-shell Navy case, and slung it over one shoulder. Then she turned and looked straight at Trina, who was frozen by the front galley. Their eyes met. For the first time in the entire flight, Trina looked away first. The aircraft landed with a low, groaning skid. Zurich's secondary runway was quiet. No other flights. But on the tarmac stood 3 black SUVs, a security detail, and one woman in a tailored coat, Cameron Levesque, interim CEO of Horizon Air. She had received the alert 10 minutes prior. Activate bylaw, 1112. Quorum vote in motion. Mercer is present. Cameron had known this day would come. They'd underestimated Evelyn Mercer for years. Called her a legacy investor, a quiet compliance figure. Dismissed her presence as symbolic. They forgot she wrote the compliance doctrine. Now she was stepping off a plane where she'd been slapped by their senior crew member while sitting in a seat she legally owned. This wasn't a public relations problem anymore. This was a power shift. The door opened. Evelyn stepped onto the stairwell. The cool air met her skin. She inhaled steady. She didn't need fanfare. She needed record. As her feet touched the tarmac, a voice from the lead SUV stepped forward. "Dr. Mercer." She nodded. "Your boardroom is ready." Inside the terminal, a private room had been prepared. Glass-walled, minimalist, cold. But Evelyn didn't sit. She stood by the long table as the emergency board video call connected. Faces from New York, D.C., Atlanta, Geneva. She scanned them silently. A few avoided her eyes. A few were already leaning forward. "Dr. Mercer," said Gregory Lang, one of the European board reps. "We've read the incident summary." "And the public response. You've triggered clause 1112. Evelyn nodded. "I have." He hesitated. "What do you intend to do?" The room was quiet. Then Evelyn placed her Echo tablet on the center of the table. With a single swipe, she played the audio Trina's voice. These people always want to play the victim. Another swipe. Passenger gasps, whispered shock, tone stress indicators glowing red. And then the slap. It wasn't just audio. It was data, timeline, context, legal grade, metadata of bias, tone escalation, and policy breach. She didn't speak over it. She let it play out. And when it ended, she said quietly, "This is not a case of overreaction. This is a case study in systems failure." The board sat silent. Even the CEO's breathing felt loud. Then Evelyn looked up. "I am not suing this airline." Surprise. "I am not demanding resignations. Not today." More surprise. "But I am enacting a binding vote. Effective immediately. Horizon Air will adopt the following." She tapped her screen again. Bias-responsive AI in all first-class cabins. Live moderation support for junior crew, and a zero-retaliation whistleblower initiative led by my firm. Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes didn't waver. "And one more thing. Trina Caldwell is to be relieved of all flight duties pending arbitration." A pause. Then a final note. "I won't fire her, but I won't protect her either." The board voted. It passed. Unanimously. Evelyn turned away from the screen and walked to the window. Outside, the same plane sat idle. Inside, a dozen passengers now whispered her name. She didn't need credit. She needed change. And she just made sure that every future seat in the sky was a little safer, a little fairer, and a little less silent. 3 days later, Zurich was calm, crisp, too pristine to match the storm Evelyn had flown through. She hadn't left immediately after the board meeting. She stayed, quietly. No press, no interviews, no public statement. She stayed not because she wanted to bask in victory, but because she was tired. Not body tired, soul tired, and there was one thing left she hadn't opened, one thing she had carried for 6 years, across oceans, across boardrooms, across every microaggression that whispered not yet, a letter. It was written on real paper, the kind that folds unevenly, creases at the corner, smells like drawer linen and old perfume. It was her mother's handwriting, uneven, looped in pain, ink that quivered in places where memory had collapsed. She had given Evelyn the envelope 6 months before passing, with one instruction: "Don't read this until someone slaps you and you don't flinch." At the time, Evelyn hadn't understood. She had been indignant, even angry that her mother would tie healing to violence, confused by the poetic cruelty. But now she understood everything. She sat in a quiet cafe in Old Zurich. No phones, no cameras, just a window, a soft rain, and the unopened letter. She breathed in, then opened it. The first line hit like truth whispered across time. "My beautiful Evelyn, I never taught you how to scream, and maybe I should have, but what I gave you instead was silence sharpened into steel. Tears welled, but they didn't fall. I watched you grow in boardrooms that didn't want you, in schools that tried to shrink you, in airplanes that saw your skin before your title, and still you stayed calm, dignified. But I worried that one day someone would mistake your stillness for surrender." Evelyn closed her eyes. The letter continued. "So when that slap comes, and it will, don't just endure it. Let it mark the turning. Let it be the place where you stop absorbing harm for the comfort of others. Let it be the moment your silence becomes signal, not shield." Her hands trembled. For years, Evelyn had believed in quiet strength, had weaponized restraint like armor, but her mother had seen further, seen that even steel gets tired of being a mirror. Sometimes it needed to become a sword. Back at Horizon HQ, News had broken. Trina Caldwell had resigned. Not under force, not by policy, but by choice. An anonymous letter had surfaced, posted online. A confession, a reckoning. It read, "I thought I understood power because I held a microphone, because I had a uniform and a passenger manifest. But I see now I was a gatekeeper, not a protector. To the woman in seat 1A, I will never forget your silence, not because it scared me, but because it freed me from the illusion that I was in control." The post ended with, "I'm stepping down, not in shame, but in understanding. And I hope that counts for something." When Evelyn read it, she didn't smile. She didn't roll her eyes. She just folded her mother's letter back into its envelope, placed it in her coat pocket, and whispered, "It does count. Not everything needed to be destroyed. Some things needed to be transformed." Later that evening, Evelyn walked the narrow streets of Zurich's Old Quarter, not as a woman recovering from humiliation, but as a woman stepping into the full weight of her inheritance. Not financial, but spiritual. Legacy isn't always what we leave behind. Sometimes it's what we survive long enough to change. She stopped by the river, watched the reflection of old buildings shimmer across the surface, and then, out loud, softly, "I think I'm ready now." Mama, the next day, Evelyn boarded a return flight. This time, no alias, no blanket over her lap. She boarded as herself, Dr. Evelyn Mercer, chair of the Horizon Ethics Board, architect of ECHO, and co-author of the new Sky Equity Protocol. Flight attendants greeted her by name. Passengers nodded with subtle recognition. And Leah, the young attendant from the earlier flight, was waiting at the door. She didn't say much, just pressed a folded note into Evelyn's hand. Inside it read, "Because of you. I stayed in aviation." Evelyn placed the note into her coat beside her mother's letter. 2 voices, 2 timelines, 1 truth. Dignity doesn't shout, but it echoes. The return flight to the U.S. wasn't quiet. It was respectfully still. Not the awkward hush that follows a public scandal, but the intentional kind of silence that shows up when people know they're in the presence of someone who's been through something and chose not to retaliate. Dr. Evelyn Mercer sat in 2A this time, not 1A, not to hide, but because she'd asked for that seat specifically. Someone else might need the front. She told the crew, and when the doors closed behind her, she unfolded the note from Leah Santoro, the junior attendant who'd written, "Because of you. I stayed in aviation." Evelyn stared at those 10 words for a long time, and her heart did something it hadn't done in a while. It softened. In row 3, a young black woman sat alone, clutching a college hoodie and glancing nervously toward the front. Her name was Imani Brooks, first-gen law student, flying to D.C. for her internship interview. She didn't know who Evelyn Mercer was. Not really. She'd seen a clip online. But she hadn't made the connection until now, when a fellow passenger whispered, "That's her. That's the woman from the slap." Imani's stomach dropped, because that meant this was the woman who owned the airline now, and she, Imani, had just spilled ginger ale on her shoe 5 minutes earlier while walking past her. Should I say something? Apologize? Stay quiet? Am I overthinking it? Imani's thoughts spiraled like a tornado in a bottle. Up front, Evelyn noticed. Of course she did. Years of reading rooms taught her how to detect unease by the flicker of an eye or the tightening of a jaw. So, during the mid-flight service window, she stood, walked to row 3, and sat across from Imani. Imani froze. Evelyn leaned in gently. "That's a good school on your sweatshirt," she said, smiling. Imani blinked. "Yes, ma'am. Howard Law. Just interviewing. D.C. Office of Public Justice. Evelyn nodded slowly. Then she pulled something from her coat pocket, a single embossed card. "If you get the offer, call that number." Imani's eyes widened. "Ma'am, we fund legal fellowships for first-gens who stay in public service longer than 3 years. You'd qualify." Imani's throat caught. "Why would you do that for me?" Evelyn smiled again. "Because someone once did it for me. And because I believe in legacies that echo." She stood, walked away, never looked back. Imani sat motionless, her heart pounding. Meanwhile, across the world, at Horizon Air HQ, change was no longer theoretical. A new department had launched Sky Equity Division, its job audit flight data for patterns of service bias, not just race, but disability, age, accent, and socioeconomic assumptions. Every seat, every interaction, every tone shift, not for punishment, but retraining. Graceful correction, the kind of policy Evelyn had once only dreamed could exist. Now it was real, and the woman they once ignored had become the architect of something far more powerful than revenge reform. At the same time, Trina Caldwell was back home, no job, no press requests anymore. Just a quiet house with too many mirrors. She hadn't expected Evelyn to be merciful, hadn't expected the board to not throw her under the bus. And yet here she was, still waking up, still free, still breathing. But something had shifted. She'd started volunteering at a domestic travel rights clinic, not to clear her name, but because the more she sat across from passengers who had been overlooked or mistreated, the more she realized how little she used to see while wearing the wings of authority. And then, one evening, as she was leaving the clinic, Trina saw a familiar woman standing by the steps. Evelyn Mercer. No cameras, just a coat, a scarf, and a question, "Mind if I walk with you?" They did. They walked 4 blocks. No tension, no confrontation. At the corner, Evelyn said, "What you wrote mattered." Trina's voice cracked. "I was cruel. I weaponized tone. I looked at people like they were disruptions to my day." Evelyn nodded slowly. "And now you look again. That's what matters." Then she paused. "Would you be willing to train future crew as a voice of what not to be? And what changed you?" Trina hesitated, then whispered, "I'd be honored." They shook hands. Nothing more. But it was everything. Back in the skies, on Evelyn's return leg to Boston, a little boy with autism began to hum loudly during descent. Flight attendants hesitated, unsure what to do. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. And then Evelyn stood up, turned toward the child, and began to hum the same tune softly, soothingly. Row by row, other passengers joined. It wasn't coordinated, it wasn't viral, it was just human. And for once, the entire plane became a chorus of compassion. When they landed, the mother mouthed, "Thank you," through tears. Evelyn didn't reply. She just placed a hand over her heart and nodded. The storm began before takeoff. It wasn't weather. It was energy. That tight, charged silence that comes when people on a plane realize something or someone is making them uncomfortable, and no one wants to be the first to name it. Dr. Evelyn Mercer had taken her seat in row 4 this time. Economy Plus. No headlines, no announcement. Just her. A scarf, and her usual steel-lined stillness. The flight was full. A popular route from Atlanta to Chicago. Businessmen in suits, a little league team in the back, and a loud, anxious passenger seated 1 row ahead in 3C, Jason Pritchard, white. Mid-50s, slacks and Bluetooth headset, still in his ear. He was muttering, scrolling, and sighing loudly as boarding continued. And then it happened. A young black father approached the row, polite, calm, wearing a gray sweatshirt and holding his daughter's hand, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She had beads in her braids and a sticker on her cheek, the kind of sticker you only get from a TSA agent who wants to make you feel safe. They stopped at row 3. "Excuse me, sir, I believe you're in our seats," the man said gently. Jason didn't even look up. "I'm not moving. The gate agent told me I could take 3C when I got upgraded." The man checked his ticket again, then held it out. "I believe this is 3A and 3B. "My daughter has the window." Jason scoffed. "Well, then they need to move you. I'm not getting up for a child. This isn't preschool, it's a plane." The tension snapped like wire. The daughter's face fell. People nearby turned their heads. And Evelyn closed her book. She stood slowly, tucked the scarf beneath her collar, and made her way up one row, stopping beside the standoff. "Sir," she said evenly, "would you mind stepping into the aisle for a moment so the crew can check seating?" Jason looked at her briefly. Did a double take. "I'm sorry. Who are you supposed to be?" His tone was dry, aggressive, dismissive in that way older men speak when they think they've found someone to dominate. Evelyn didn't flinch. She never did. A flight attendant arrived, young, unsteady, her voice uncertain. I think we may have a double book. Let me check." But Jason cut her off. "Look, I'm a Delta Medallion Plus. I don't have time for amateur hour. Either you move that man and his kid or I will—" He turned back to the father. "You can sit somewhere else. It's not that serious." The little girl's eyes brimmed. She clutched her dad's hand tightly. Evelyn stepped forward calmly. "Sir," she said, "you're escalating a situation over a seat that is clearly not yours. You don't have authority here." Jason sneered. "And who exactly do you think you are?" Evelyn didn't answer. Not with words. She handed the attendant a small black card, one only a few people in the airline knew existed. The attendant read it. Blink, then stared again. "Ma'am, I didn't realize you were on board." Jason was confused. "What's going on?" The attendant's voice. "Now more firm, sir. Please gather your things and follow me." "Now!" Jason exploded. "You can't do this. You don't even know who I am, sir." The attendant repeated, "That woman is Dr. Evelyn Mercer. She's not just a passenger. She chairs our board." Silence. The plane hushed. A collective pause. Jason's eyes darted back to Evelyn, and for the first time, he saw her fully. Not as a woman, not as a disruption, but as a presence he couldn't outrun. His mouth opened, but Evelyn raised her hand softly. "Don't explain," she said. "Not to me. Apologize to the child." Jason looked at the girl. She was staring at him, not in fear, but with dignity, a quiet understanding of what this moment meant. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry." And then he left the row. The father and daughter took their rightful seats. Evelyn returned to hers. No applause, no viral recording, just stillness again. A man behind her leaned in. That was incredible. Evelyn smiled faintly. That was accountability. After the flight, the young attendant Kara caught up to Evelyn near the baggage claim. "Dr. Mercer, I didn't recognize you right away." "I panicked. I'm sorry if I made it worse." Evelyn shook her head. "You didn't make it worse. You stayed present. That's more than most people do." Then she handed Kara something, a folded form Sky Equity Leadership Training invitation. Kara's mouth dropped. "You want me to train?" Evelyn nodded. "The ones who grow in discomfort are the ones who should teach." Kara's eyes welled. Later that evening, Evelyn sat by her window in Chicago. No noise, just the hum of the city and the soft tap of raindrops. She opened a journal, wrote one sentence. "I'm learning that power is not something you take up. It's something you carry without making others smaller." The red-eye flight from Chicago to San Francisco was nearly empty. Just 37 passengers, half asleep, half scrolling, wrapped in silence and the soft drone of recycled air. "Doctor, Evelyn Mercer had taken a window seat near the back. She never sat in the front anymore. Not since the slap. Not since the world recognized her face more than her work. She liked the quiet of the middle rows, the anonymity, the stillness between things. Across the aisle, in 6F, a man sat curled toward the window, slumped, motionless. At first, Evelyn thought he was sleeping, but the way his fingers gripped the edge of his tray table white-knuckled and still told a different story. Something about that posture pulled at her midway through the flight. She stood to stretch her legs. As she walked past his row, she noticed something tucked under his seat, a stuffed raccoon, worn, torn on one ear, not the kind of item a man in his 40s usually carried. She hesitated, then gently tapped the armrest beside him. "Sir." He didn't respond at first. Then slowly, he turned. His eyes were red. Not from sleep, from grief. "Yeah." He mumbled, Your tray's about to fall. Thought I'd let you know." He nodded once. Didn't thank her. Didn't smile. But she didn't take offense. Evelyn could spot that kind of silence from miles away. The kind that isn't rude, just broken. She returned to her seat, tried to read, couldn't. 10 minutes later, the man leaned across the aisle. "Sorry if I seemed off earlier. Just hard week." Evelyn looked up. No apology needed. He paused, then whispered, "I buried my daughter 3 days ago." She was 7. Evelyn felt the world tilt, not outwardly, inwardly. Something in her chest clenched. She loved flying. He continued, "We were supposed to go to Seattle together last month. But she got sick. Fast." He held up the raccoon. "She used to say it was her co-pilot. Told me to bring it next time." So I did. Evelyn reached slowly into her coat, pulled out a laminated boarding pass. From 10 years ago, the last flight she ever took with her brother before he died. "I carry this with me every time I fly," she said quietly. "It doesn't make it easier, but it reminds me love doesn't disappear. It just travels differently." He blinked, then nodded. They didn't talk again for an hour, just sat in companionable silence. Two people riding grief-like parallel trains on separate tracks, but glancing at one another through the glass every few miles. Before landing, the man spoke once more. "You know, you look familiar." "Are you that woman from the..." Evelyn interrupted softly. "I'm someone who believes that no one should have to earn dignity mid-flight." He stared at her, and this time he smiled. As passengers began to disembark, he placed the raccoon in the seat beside him, took out a Sharpie, wrote something on its paw, then handed it to Evelyn. "For your next flight." She looked down. The paw said, "Carry her forward." Hours later, Evelyn stood at the gates of Horizon's new foundation, Cabin 6F, a grief support grant for bereaved parents, traveling for medical or funeral reasons. No cost, no forms, just assistance, quiet, respectful, the kind that makes you feel human even when the world has taken everything from you. That evening, Evelyn wrote in her journal, "Some passengers are not passengers at all. They are reminders in motion. Row 0 didn't exist on the seat map, not for passengers, anyway. But for Dr. Evelyn Mercer, it was where everything had started, 27 years ago." On her very first flight as a freshly recruited training coordinator for Horizon Air, she had been assigned a jump seat. Not listed, not acknowledged. No first-class treatment, just a blue uniform, a thin notebook, and a mandate to observe. That day, she met Marlene Easton, a senior flight director, one of the highest-ranked women in the company at the time. Blonde, steel-eyed, efficient, she had taught Evelyn how to pin a scarf, how to navigate cabin conflict, and most of all, how to be invisible while holding everything together. Control isn't power. Marlene had once said, "It's the illusion of calm. If they don't know who's responsible, it means you're doing your job." Evelyn believed her for years, until she stopped. Now, nearly 3 decades later. Evelyn sat across from Marlene again, this time not in a jump seat, but in a private lounge at Horizon's annual leadership summit. Marlene had retired, still elegant, still sharp, now a board consultant, and Evelyn, now the chairwoman. But neither of them had said the word power. "Not yet. You've come a long way," Marlene began, stirring tea. "They talk about you like legend, the quiet one who became the reckoning." Evelyn smiled politely. "I didn't come to be celebrated." Marlene leaned back. "No, I imagine you came for answers." Silence fell between them, not awkward, just aged. "Why didn't you stop it?" Evelyn asked at last. Marlene blinked. "Stop what?" "The culture," Evelyn replied. "The patterns, the protection of aggressors." "You knew." Marlene didn't deny it. "I also knew what happened to the women who spoke up too loudly. I made it farther than most because I played the game better." "And how many had to lose so you could win quietly?" Evelyn asked, her voice level. Marlene set her cup down. "You think you're different. You think your calm is some kind of moral high ground. I think my calm is earned." Evelyn replied, "I've been invisible too. But not because I was hiding. Because I was documenting." Marlene scoffed lightly. "You always were the archivist." "Not anymore." Evelyn reached into her folder and slid across a document, a memorandum from 2004, signed by Marlene, recommending that Evelyn, then 3 years into her career, be passed over for a director promotion in favor of someone with more customer-facing warmth. "I found this last year," Marlene exhaled. No denial, just a weary acknowledgement. "It was either you or the VP's goddaughter. You weren't the political choice, but I was the right one." Evelyn said softly. "Yes." Marlene whispered. "You were." The air felt heavier now. Evelyn stood. "I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to correct the record." She opened her phone, showed Marlene a preview of the new Horizon documentary project. Row zero stories from the women who kept us flying. 25 former attendants, 2 pilots, 1 medical worker who saved a child mid-flight in 1999, and Evelyn herself, closing the series with one line. "We were never passengers. We were infrastructure." Marlene's eyes shimmered. "I should have protected you more." Evelyn shook her head. "You taught me enough to protect myself. Then." She paused. "But I won't teach the next generation to survive. I'll teach them to lead." As Evelyn walked toward the elevator, a junior employee stopped her. Nina Delgado, Latina, early 20s, uniform still too crisp, eyes filled with questions. "Dr. Mercer." "I'm sorry, I don't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," Evelyn said, smiling gently. I've been watching your story since the 216 incident. I didn't think women like us could sit where you do." Evelyn looked her in the eye. "Then sit next to me next time. Don't wait for permission. That's a myth. They don't own the seat. They never did." That night, Evelyn returned to her hotel room, wrote a single line in her journal. "Power isn't what you inherit. It's what you choose to leave behind, fully visible." The cabin lights dimmed, not because it was night, but because the press event was over. The cameras had stopped rolling. The executives had retreated to their cocktail briefings. And Evelyn Mercer, now 62, with streaks of silver in her once black hair, was alone in the empty Horizon Air aircraft hangar, standing inside a symbolic mock-up of the newly unveiled aircraft series, the Mercer Line. Her name across the tail, not in gold, but in brushed titanium, unpolished, permanent. Earlier that afternoon, she had taken her final board meeting. No drama, no applause. Just a simple, gentle statement. After 33 years, "I'm stepping off the flight path." Her voice had been steady, her decision final, But now, sitting alone in the first row seat of Aircraft 01, she felt something rare, weightless, not unanchored, not lost, just free. A flight attendant approached quietly. Kara Monroe, now chief of in-flight operations, the same young woman Evelyn had once encouraged during a chaotic gate conflict years before. "We're ready to begin boarding," Kara said playfully. "Oh, and where am I headed? Wherever you choose." Evelyn smiled, unbuckled, and stood. Then, maybe it's not a flight anymore. Maybe it's a handoff. She handed Kara a sealed envelope, labeled "To be opened after takeoff." Kara clutched it gently, eyes misting. "You sure this plane is yours now? The air belongs to who you carry through it later." In the quiet of her apartment, Evelyn lit a single candle, a tradition she'd started after Flight 216, one flame for every year she served. 33. She stood at the window, watching the city move below, the unseen hands, the voices no one listened for, and she wrote her final journal entry. They thought the seat mattered, but the story always belonged to the one who stayed buckled during turbulence, to the one who held the hand of the child quietly crying after boarding, to the one who never asked for spotlight, only respect. "I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to make flying safer for the people who were always told to be smaller. But we were never small. We were structure. We were steel beneath the seams. And now I leave not with noise, but with legacy. Let the skies remember us." 3 months later, a new training module launched at Horizon Air, the Evelyn Mercer Flight Academy, a program focused not on compliance, but compassion, de-escalation, cultural humility, anti-bias training, named not for a brand, but for a principle at its launch event. Kara read the letter Evelyn had left her. "Kara, if you're reading this, it means the torch has been passed. But this is not about hierarchy. It's about altitude, emotional altitude. How high we choose to rise, even when the world tells us to descend into pettiness. Keep choosing the higher air. Keep your voice level, your documents tight, and your empathy untouchable. One day, someone will ask how you got here, and you'll smile, because they never saw you coming either." At the back of the event sat a teenage girl, 15 braided hair, a quiet confidence about her. Her name, Leona Easton, daughter of Marlene. She had watched Evelyn's final speech on YouTube 5 times, had asked her mother why she cried at the end. "Because," Marlene had answered, "I taught Evelyn how to disappear, and she taught the world how to see." That evening, as Kara walked past the gates, a man tapped her shoulder, mid-40s, wearing a travel-worn suit. "Sorry, do you work here? I was just trying to figure out where to send this." He held up a small raccoon plush, worn, torn on one ear. Kara blinked. "Where did you get that?" "It was mailed to me anonymously, with a note. Said to pass it along. Said someone named Evelyn once said this was a co-pilot for grief." Kara swallowed hard. "You're Marcus Glenn, aren't you?" He nodded, surprised. "How'd you know?" "Because she told me about you. And now, your daughter's story lives on in every flight trained here." He handed her the raccoon, and, together, they placed it in a glass case at the entryway of the Evelyn Mercer Flight Academy, labeled, "Carry her forward." You've now heard the story of Evelyn Mercer, the woman who built her empire in silence and changed an entire industry without ever raising her voice. She didn't need to humiliate anyone. She didn't need a press tour. She let the truth unfold, seat by seat, name by name, policy by policy. Because sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is not a scream, but a system you've quietly prepared to speak for you. Her story is more than a viral flight incident. It's a reminder that racism, classism, and gender bias still live in the aisles we walk through every day. That dignity is not something granted by status. It's something we protect, one choice at a time. And for anyone who's ever been told to sit down, be quiet, or wait your turn, let Evelyn show you. Your silence doesn't mean surrender. It means strategy. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your worth, or woke something deep inside, please like, share, and subscribe to hear more stories that speak truth, call out injustice, and uplift quiet power. And remember, the next Evelyn Mercer could be boarding right behind you. Let's make sure the skies are ready.